Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Thomas Pogge. He's the director of the Global Justice Program at the MacMillan Center and is the Leitner Professor of Philosophy and International Affairs at Yale University. Professor Pogge has published widely on Kant and moral and political philosophy, including various books on Rawls and global justice. He currently heads an international team effort to blueprint and create the Health Impact Fund, which will work to improve access to advanced medicines for the poor worldwide. Professor Pogge is also president of Academics Stand Against Poverty, an independent global organization that aims to eradicate severe poverty worldwide by leveraging the knowledge and standing of academics in order to influence policy and public attitudes. Today, we talk with Professor Pogge about his new book, Poverty and the Millennium Development Goals, a critical look forward. Welcome, Professor Pogge.
Thanks very much.
It's very nice to have you back on the show with us.
Thanks.
Let's begin with your book. Please give us an overview of it.
Yeah, so I should say it's an edited book. It's a collection of 10 essays which discuss our experience with the Millennium Development Goals. These goals were adopted at the end of the year 2000. That's why they're called the Millennium Development Goals. And they were basically setting the course for how the world's governments were going to make sure that poverty would be diminished or, as they say, eradicated, hunger, disease, various deprivations. And now the 15 years are up. The 31st of December 2015 was the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals. And they were replaced, as you probably know, in September by the Sustainable Development Goals, which will govern the next 15 years.
Okay.
And so this is a very, very good time, we thought, to look back on the experience with the Millennium Development Goals and to see what we can learn about the forthcoming Sustainable Development Goals.
So tell us a little bit about the people who contributed the articles to the book.
Well, we had a preponderance of Southern authors, in fact, and they were to some extent revealing their experience in their various countries with the development goals.
And what countries are we talking about?
Brazil, for example, some South Asian countries, and so from basically a good smattering of the
Africa.
southern countries. Yes, Africa, but also some northern authors. And so we have, for example, some very detailed commentary. So the Brazilian contribution was talking in particular about how one educational development goal had pushed things in a good direction for some people, but had overlooked another crucial group of people, namely people who did not get a primary education when they were supposed to get it in their early years, and are now getting schooling very late in life. And it's essentially governments are incentivized because they want to look good relative to the Millennium Development Goals, are incentivized to do certain things, but they're also thereby, their attention is diverted from other things that are also important and that they might also do. So that's one important lesson, that when you formulate these goals, just think about them as incentives. What would governments do that are single-mindedly focused on developing good numbers, having good-looking numbers? What might they do that could be counterproductive, unintended consequences of these goals?
Okay, we'll get into that in a minute. Let's talk about what the actual Millennium Development Goals are. Can you tell us about some of them?
Sure. The headline goal number 1, was to eradicate poverty and hunger, with an immediate goal by 2015 to halve them. And here they took the year 1990 as a baseline and said that we want to halve the proportion of the population in the developing countries that are suffering from extreme poverty and hunger. And so had a 25-year period. If you ask me, I thought this was somewhat under-ambitious to take 25 years to solve only half a problem that is so massive and severe. But anyway, that was the goal.
Okay.
And then there was annual reporting on the Millennium Development Goals, and what they have come up with in the end is that as far as extreme poverty is concerned, we have way overfulfilled the target. We have basically achieved a 2/3 reduction. And with regard to hunger, we have achieved roughly a 45% reduction in the proportion, where we should have achieved a 50% reduction. But it's very crucial here to look behind the numbers and how they were generated.
Okay, let's do that. Tell us about the numbers.
Yeah, so let me start with hunger.
Okay.
And what happened with the hunger goal is that initially, in the first many years of the Millennium Development Goal period, the hunger numbers were actually going up in absolute terms. And there was the famous incident then in the year 2009 when the FAO, which was in charge of keeping the numbers, announced that for the first time in all of human history, more than 1 billion people were chronically undernourished. It was 1.023 or 23 million more than 1 billion. And they started a campaign saying, we are mad as hell, more than 1 billion people hungry. Now that was in the wake of food riots in about 28 countries, developing countries. You may remember the Arab Spring was partly caused by these or initiated by these food riots. And it was very unwelcome news for the World Bank, because the World Bank had for years and years been saying that extreme poverty is falling like a brick, much faster than we had even announced. And so the few people in the world who care about these things, they were looking at these numbers and saying, that can't be right. How can hunger go up and up and up while extreme poverty is going down and down and down? We thought that hunger is extreme poverty. These are essentially the same people. And so what happened then was that very quickly the FAO was told to convene a panel of experts and to revise its methodology for counting the hungry.
So what was the problem, you know, at the problem of?
Well, the problem was, if you ask me again, I think that there were severe problems in the methodology of the World Bank. The World Bank is using a money metric poverty line where they convert from one currency to the next in terms of the prices of all the goods and services, right? You're not using, when you convert, you're not using the exchange rate that you get at the bank, because obviously a person who has $1 in India can buy more with that dollar than what a person can buy in the United States.
Right.
So what they use is purchasing power parities. So to give you an example, $1 is worth about 60 rupees in India, but the World Bank is saying that about 16 rupees is sufficient to have as much purchasing power as $1 gives you in the United States.
Okay.
Now that is true in general if you buy the kind of stuff that the population of India or the United States is buying. But if you are very, very poor, then you buy only a very small subsegment of all the goods and services that go into the purchasing power parity calculations. And that very small subsegment is essentially foodstuffs, basic foodstuffs. And basic foodstuffs, it turns out, are cheaper in India than they are in the US, but not as much cheaper as the purchasing powers of the World Bank would suggest.
Okay.
And so the World Bank's tracking is really way off, because the World Bank, in using consumer price indices and purchasing power parities to convert the anchoring US dollar of the year 2005 into other years and other currencies, is distorting the conversion. And so I think that a lot of that very dramatic fall in poverty was due simply to the way the World Bank was calculating.
Okay.
And so I have little confidence in the hunger numbers and even less confidence in the poverty numbers. But given that they were both calculated on the basis of a very poor methodology, it's not surprising that they went in opposite directions. But what happened then was that the FAO, with the help of all these experts who were convened, was unveiling a whole new methodology in the year 2012.
Okay.
And the result of that was that the number of hungry people in the year 1990, the base year, was increased a lot, and the number of hungry people in the later years, 2009, 2010, was decreased a lot. So what had been a steadily rising poverty trend suddenly became a steadily falling poverty trend. And so it became not exactly consistent with the World Bank's numbers, but at least it was going in the right direction. And that is, again, one of the things that we criticize in the book, because we believe that this was essentially done with hindsight, and that the new definition of chronic undernourishment that the FAO is now using is a really inappropriate definition. They define undernourishment in terms of dietary intake. That's the first problem, that very often in poor countries, people have absorption problems. So they may take in the diet, they may take in the energy, but it may not arrive in their system because they have parasites or they have a disease of the small intestine, which hampers their absorption. Secondly, the FAO is only looking at the energy intake. And of course, you could have enough energy simply from drinking enough Coca-Cola. But a human body needs much more than just energy. It needs, for example, minerals, vitamins, and so forth. And this is not a small problem. Many, many women in the developing countries suffer from anemia, iron deficiency, anemia, millions and millions of people. Many people suffer from vitamin A deficiency, iodine insufficiency, and so many, many people are undernourished even though they get enough energy intake. The third thing is that they said that you have to take in enough energy which is sufficient for a sedentary lifestyle. And that again is a distortion, because many people in the developing world may have enough energy intake for a sedentary lifestyle, but do not get enough energy for the lifestyle that they actually have. And that's not because they go to the gym a lot, but because their income depends on doing hard labor. So housewives, for example, they don't turn on the tap often to get water. They have to go to the river or to the well and carry water on their heads for long distances. Men are working in the fields or are working in construction or are working as rickshaw drivers, and again they're expending a lot of energy. I know from my own experience, when I go to the gym, I count the calories, and I consume about 600 kilocalories an hour in the gym. And so the 1800 kilocalories that the FAO thinks are sufficient, well, they are sufficient if I just type all day long, but if I just go to the gym for only 1 hour, I'm at 2400. And of course, people in the developing world don't work just for 1 hour, they work the whole day long. And if they work, let's say, 8 hours at half the energy level that I consume in the gym, that would be an additional 1800 kilocalories that would double their energy need or energy consumption. And the fourth and final condition that the FAO's definition includes is that you have to be below that minimum energy level for a sedentary lifestyle for over a year before you count as undernourished. And to defend that, they say we realize that being below that level may be stressful if it's below a year, but we focus very narrowly on nutritional deficits that are detrimental to health. So in other words, if you go below that energy level of the sedentary lifestyle for less than a year, it's not detrimental to health. And that, of course, is totally ridiculous because, as we all know, from hunger strikes and from famines, people die in 45 to 60 years if they don't get enough energy. And so, again, the FAO definition leaves out many, many people. It leaves out those people who have absorption problems, those people who work hard, those people who have nutritional deficits other than energy, and those people who have shorter periods of undernourishment.
So how does that happen? How does such a mistake like that happen?
Well, I surmise, and I have a little bit of anecdotal evidence about that, I surmise that this is because the FAO got under a lot of pressure. They got under pressure especially when they came out with this big news, more than 1 billion people hungry. They hung that from the windows of the FAO headquarters in Rome. It was big news in 2009. And so it got a lot of governments upset, because governments, of course, were very proud of their globalization project and how it was lifting all boats and helping especially the poor, and we would never engage in it if it weren't helping the poor and so on. And so the FAO got under pressure and felt they needed to do something. Now, why didn't the FAO hold their head up high and say, these are the numbers, and you better live with them, and you have to change your policies rather than we change our numbers?
Right.
Well, the FAO is an intergovernmental organization. Their leaders are appointed by governments. Their budgets are decided by governments. About 58% of the FAO budget comes ad hoc, where governments it's not the regular budget that they get regularly, but it's additional money that they get for this or that project on an ad hoc basis. And so it's very important, if you care about poor people and if you care about the work that the FAO is doing, to be on good terms with governments. And if governments get really displeased with you,
they will not give you money.
Right, they will not give you money. And so the FAO people were, I think, in a very difficult situation.
Yes.
On the one hand, they felt that being honest and true to the poor meant they had to defend their numbers and say, this is what's really happening in the world. Hunger is getting worse. On the other hand, if you want to keep up your good work and get the cooperation of governments, you feel that maybe you have to betray the numbers and just give the governments what they want so that they give you what you need to do your job.
It seems like a catch-22. How do you get around that?
Well, the answer is very obvious. We cannot leave the measurement of progress to these weak, vulnerable, politically exposed intergovernmental agencies, because we put them in an impossible position. What do we have universities for? Right? We have fantastic experts on food, on hunger, on poverty in universities. We have an existing network of universities that spans the globe, of people who are working together already, who are in the same discipline, who peer review one another's work. We could easily create a poverty measurement, undernourishment measurement operation, a network of people that is much better than anything the FAO can field. And more importantly, it would be independent. These are first-rate academics who have big reputations to lose, and they would deliver the correct verdict without fear or favor. They would not be easily manipulated by governments into changing their tune just to make the numbers look better.
Is that one of your findings in your book? Is that one of your suggestions?
That's one of the suggestions that we make, and I think it's a very important thing to press. And here you see how forward-going for the SDGs, we have an important message, right? Let the SDGs be different. Let the measurement be taken out of the hands of the people who are doing the work. Let the FAO be the leader on the work on the ground. Let them lead the effort to fight hunger and undernutrition. But the observation, the monitoring of that fight, how it's going, let that be done by an independent, objective agency so that the world really knows what is happening.
That makes sense, yes. What are some of your other findings?
Well, it's hard to summarize because there are a lot of different things, but maybe I say one or two more things that are interesting for the viewers perhaps to think about. So one of the things that actually I contributed to the volume is the thought that if you think about these development goals, you are systematically thinking in a way that's quite different from the way we often think about these matters of deprivation, namely in human rights terms. And so I reflect upon the difference between the goals language and the rights language.
Okay.
The goals language says basically, here is something that we want to attain in the future, and let's just walk in the right direction and keep going, and sooner or later we'll get to our goal. The rights language says, here are people who are suffering severe deprivations, their human rights are unfulfilled, they have a right that immediate action be taken to fulfill their needs. So, for example, undernutrition or extreme poverty. These are the objects of human rights in the Universal Declaration, in the international covenants, and so on. And so something needs to be done immediately. So in a sense, the goal language is watering down humanity's commitment to eradicate deprivations. And to drive that home, just imagine, for example, FDR, Roosevelt, had said in 1941, you know, the horrible things are being done by the Nazis. They're overrunning countries in Europe. They are putting hundreds of thousands of people into concentration camps. We should set the goal of halving the number of people suffering by 1960, in 19 years or something like that. I mean, that would have been a pretty ridiculous thing to say. If people's human rights are being violated, you can't sort of make that a goal and say, yeah, we do a little bit every day and we sort of get it down. And so I think that, again, we were too easily sucked into the language of goals and thereby appeased with regard to demanding immediate full action. And, you know, the thing what's really heartbreaking about these problems of deprivations, of poverty, of undernourishment, of disease, is that in economic terms, these problems are tiny. You know, at the cost of invading Iraq, you could abolish hunger and severe poverty worldwide very easily. It is economically a small problem, and in human terms, it's still half of humanity are living on the brink of life-threatening deprivation. And today, with today's technologies, administrative capacities, economic wherewithal, we could wipe these problems out, and I think we should.
I completely agree. Why do you think we are not wiping them out, since it is possible?
Well, I think that politicians, for better or worse, think that this is something that nobody's really going to reward them for. And to the contrary, voters may feel restive if too much money is spent abroad. You see it, for example, with the promise that was made in the 1970s, where all the developed countries promised they would spend 0.7% of their gross national product on development assistance. A few countries have reached that target. Britain very recently, Finland, Sweden, Norway, I think Denmark, maybe the Netherlands at some point, but not anymore. But the vast majority of countries has never reached that goal, never gotten anywhere near. The United States is sort of hovering in the teens even, I mean, way below 0.7, somewhere around 0.19, 18, something like that. So this is simply that it's too easy for nationalist politicians to step forward and to say, the government is giving away the store. You know, they are giving all your tax money to foreigners, and then, of course, you start talking about the corruption abroad and so on, and that it's sending money down a rat hole and so forth. And so I think that is the way that it's just too easy for nationalist politicians to block and to oppose this kind of move. And frankly, few politicians really care enough. Politicians are, for the most part, interested in their own careers, in their own success politically. And when they win and when they have power, they try to preserve that power, and they don't really think about the morally most urgent issues.
So in terms of the sustainable development goals that have been developed, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are very different. They are much, much longer. So you have, instead of 18 targets, you have 169 targets.
Wow.
The MDGs were 8 goals and 18 targets. So here we have 17 goals and 169 targets. So it's a very, very long list. And it is a more comprehensive list, which again has some of the old goals included in it, but also a lot of other new things. And one thing that is especially noteworthy and important is that you have inequality as a specific goal, that inequality should be reduced. The goal is then watered down by one of the targets, which says that the reduction of inequality should have begun before 2030. So inequality can still go up until 2029, and then it should, which is really lame. You know, we should think about inequality right now, and we should certainly aim to have less inequality in the world, both international and intranational, in 2030 than we have today. So, but anyway, the SDGs at least have talk about inequality. They talk about illicit financial flows, a very important topic, that a lot of money is being sucked out of poor countries with the help of tax havens, corrupt law firms, accounting firms, financial advisors, and so on. Important multinational corporations, as in the meantime we all have learned, pay very little taxes in the US, very little in Europe. But guess how much they pay in the poor countries, who are much more defenseless and much less able to resist, right? They pay no taxes. They basically shift all their profits into tax havens, and at last count, the multinational corporations together have about $2.3 trillion sitting in tax havens, completely untaxed, waiting to spend that money in ways, you know, certainly trying to avoid forever paying taxes. Many companies are now trying to use inversions, where they buy a company abroad and then shift their headquarters to the company they've bought. So Pfizer is currently doing that, a big pharmaceutical company, trying to become a non-US company and thereby permanently to avoid paying taxes on the accumulated money in tax havens. So that's a problem that the SDGs at least flag. They mention it. They don't thematize it in an appropriate way, but at least it's in there. And so, and then of course the environment. The name Sustainable Development Goals already suggests that there is a concern with the environment, and at least it gets mentioned.
Okay, so ultimately, what do you hope your book will do?
The book, I hope it will educate citizens, because we as citizens have a responsibility to think about what is being done in our names, right? We live in a democratic society. Our government acts in the name of the people of the country, and we are responsible for what the government does, which means we also have to supervise. We have to know what the government does and supervise it. And if it is not morally appropriate what the government is doing, or immoral or wrong, we have to speak out, and we have to say, not in our name, don't do that. And that is true, of course, as everybody understands, with regard to foreign wars that our government may be involved in. But it is just as true with regard to economic rules that our government may be involved in negotiating with other countries. And here, of course, it is to be said that the US government is still by far the strongest government in the world in international negotiations. And so it matters a great deal what negotiating position our government is taking. And we mustn't let that be influenced solely by the big corporations, which of course are interested only in their own bottom line. We have to make sure that our government stands for justice and stands for the common good of humankind, and defends also the interests of the poorest human beings, who really have nobody else to speak up for them, right? Because their own governments are often corrupt and, in any case, quite powerless to intervene meaningfully in international negotiations.
Okay, thank you very much for being here with us and sharing your work.
You're very welcome, Marilyn. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. For more information about Professor Pogge and his research, please visit our website at macmillanreport.yale.edu. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.